Look at that. For all of the talk about the polling ties, in the end, this is a pretty decisive victory for Donald Trump. Take us inside it.
Yeah, a couple ways to look at it, Savannah. You see some of these battlegrounds still, Michigan, Nevada, Arizona, not called. Trump is ahead in all three of those. There's a very good chance Trump is going to go 7 for 7 in the core battleground states. But the victory he's put up here goes beyond those battleground states. These are the electoral votes. Let's flip it over and show you what the popular vote looks like right now. And you can see Trump right now with an outright majority of the popular vote, an advantage of more than 5 million votes nationally over Kamala Harris.
Massive victory from President Trump 1 month ago. And so many people are focused on the transition. I know we certainly are here, that it's almost like we haven't stepped back and really started analyzing not just the overall arc of how President Trump won, but the specific groups that were key to this victory. Groups, by the way, that hadn't voted in some cases for a Republican in years, or other cases ever. And Ryan Girdusky has written this incredible piece over at the American Conservative. It's a long piece, but it's well worth your time because it does go through the full story of the election, really from about 2022, early 2023 to the election itself, and walks through the ups and downs, but specifically gets into that coalition of supporters that President Trump was able to put together, and then offers at the end a sort of message to Republicans that goes with the title, a governing majority if you can keep it, playing off the old Ben Franklin quote. Ryan Girdusky joins us now. Ryan, do we have a governing majority?
We do. I mean, for the very first time in 2 decades, Republicans actually have a governing majority, something that we're not used to, playing for, a minority of the national votes. Republicans had it in the House and they had it in the presidential election, and they would have had it in the Senate if the states were a little different, or if there was a national one where every state was competitive in. But that being said, I looked back when writing this piece for the American Conservative magazine, and thank you for reading it and talking about it. I looked back at the last 2 years because in the afterglow of such a big election victory, it's almost unfounding how much of a comeback this election was. 2 years ago, 20 months ago, actually 24 months ago now, Trump was in the worst place he was in since 2016. I mean, things were not really going fantastic for him, and he had a Nixonian style comeback, one that you don't see in real life ever. And Nixon is the only person within anyone's living memory that we've seen such a comeback. And not only to defeat his Republican primary opponents, but then to defeat 2 Democrats, which is really what he did. I looked back and saw one by one how he reassembled both his party base, which was very fragile back in 2023, and then a national majority to give him the presidency, win every swing state, and put some blue states within an inch of flipping. And had Joe Biden still been the nominee, I believe they all would have flipped.
And this really is the big piece of it, because one of the flips that I saw, and I've been talking about it for a while, but I haven't really dug into it as much, was, and it's kind of our generation, man. It's the millennials. And so you have so many millennials that are now entering a different phase of their life, and it's sort of the Churchillian kind of quotation about you get more conservative as you get older, that people have really stepped away from the Barack Obama moment. And people it's so hard to explain to you if you don't remember 2008 and how much of a movement Barack Obama was. And I would hear millennials talk about him like he was the second coming of Jesus. And this whole thing was media instituted, and something incredible has happened, that 2024 really was the end of a certain era of politics, and certainly I think the end of the Obama era, the end of the neoliberal era, and really just kind of the end of him really having a major influence in our national conversation. And you kind of see that reflected in the way that so many millennials, which were his coalition, have now moved over to Trump and Vance and others who are actually going to do something about this. And oh, by the way, you can even kind of see that reflected in Trump's nominees, because Hegseth and J.D. Vance himself and Tulsi, not only are they veterans, they're the GWAT, Global War on Terror veterans who believed so much of the stuff that was going around back then and then have moved off. But not to get into the nominees, but Gerdusky, talk to me about millennials moving away from Obama.
Right. I think that if you look back, I mean, remember what years we came into adulthood and came into our formative years, which was the Bush years. And the second term of Bush, I mean, the first term he was very well respected because of 9/11, but the second term of Bush, it was really a horrific presidency, the second term of Bush. I mean, it was awful. There was very little positives you could say about it, from the gutting of manufacturing to the endless war on terror that was drilled, that put thousands of people either in body bags or came back with horrible PTSD, and the inflation and the stock market crash. All of those things culminated at the end of the Bush presidency. So to still want to be a Republican post George W. Bush was like announcing that you were a leper. It was very, very, very strange if you were a millennial. There was a genuine groundswell of support for Barack Obama that did feel like a movement, a youth movement, and it was electorally. It's taken 20 years or nearly 20 years to really come out of that. Cultural fights like gay marriage, which put a lot of millennials into the Democratic order, it's not an issue anymore. Abortion wasn't an issue for millennials the way that many people thought that it would be. It's not like many 35-year-olds who, a lot of them are either A, married, or B, never planning to marry or have full control of their body autonomy. So it's not all the cultural flashpoints that the left has been using and banking on for nearly 20 years really have gone by the wayside. The economic standpoint for millennials who are looking for their first home or their second home or whatever the case, or trying to afford maybe private school for their children, it's become economically unavailable to them. Things that were within reach a couple of years ago. And I spoke to someone who I remember they had voted Republican for the very first time ever for the governor for the Connecticut governor's race. And that was like in 2022, and they were like, I feel weird about it, but this is not working. And there was these slow moving things throughout the years where I think by 2024 they were like, this what I have believed in, what I have done is clearly not working. And the issues of like Ukraine or democracy or whatnot, or abortion, they care about them to a certain extent, but not more than their pocketbook, not more than the price of groceries, not more than their personal safety, not more than their ability to buy a home. And Donald Trump did something very, very specific in this election cycle. Since the Bush administration, to be a Republican meant you had to really whisper about it in most corners of the country. Donald Trump made himself, and thus Republicans as a whole, a bigger, I want to say, for lack of a term, more socially appropriate thing. Trump going to UFC fights was an event within itself. Who would stop by and say hello to him? With Trump going on 1 million podcasts was super, super important for people who consume that. Not just like 18-year-old, 20-year-olds, most 30-year-olds is how they get their news from. And people who are intellectually curious. You want to hear, I wrote this in the American Conservative piece. You want to hear, Trump talk about Jeffrey Epstein? There's a podcast episode. Or how about aliens? It's a podcast episode. Inflation, there's a podcast episode. Immigration, whatever the case is. He became more relatable through these events, through these things, while Kamala Harris, through her celebrity endorsements like Taylor Swift and Oprah Winfrey and Beyonce, became less relatable. The average person cannot relate to Oprah Winfrey or Taylor Swift or Beyonce, but Andrew Schultz is much more relatable, or Joe Rogan is relatable to a lot of people despite being super wealthy, because that's how they've made their money. That's how they made their fortune, is by being a relatable personality who doesn't come across as untouchable because they're so famous. And Donald Trump, as a man who's been wealthy his whole life and famous most of his life, longer than most people alive, the average American's life has been more famous than, became an approachable person. The ability in the last 22 months to change a public image by somebody who is universally known is almost unheard of. And I think that that came through the way he approached media, and also I think by his indictments, he went from being a quote unquote bully to a martyr for a lot of people, and all of that I think really worked, especially within the 30 to 45 age range.